So I was born female and transitioned to male 6 years ago. I knew from a fairly young age that I was in the wrong body is kind of a misnomer, but that my brain and my personality and who I was inherently in myself was male, and my body didn't match that. And so at 19, I made the decision to medically transition to male to bring my brain and body into alignment. Trans, and it's often depicted as trans, T-R-A-N-S, asterisk, is a blanket term for all gender nonconforming identities and medical transition identities entirely. So it's a blanket term. You'll see it used on places like Tumblr and Facebook and Twitter and social media. That's where it's actually most common. It's starting to go into academic literature, but it's just kind of like, we're going to talk about trans issues. It's this huge blanket. Transgender is similar. So transgender is also a blanket term that covers a whole range of things. Transsexual is somebody who is seeking specifically medical sex reassignment, which is often hormones and surgery, so that's specific to that. Genderqueer is someone who is not seeking medical intervention, but is aiming to either identify or present in like dress and mannerisms physically as somebody who is more gender neutral than gender specific at either end of the spectrum, and so that's also can be a bit of a broad term. Transvestite is specific to people who cross-dress, who are not interested in medically transitioning. They have no conflict around their gender. It's about like the clothing and the process of cross-dressing itself, and so it's separate from people who are starting to present as the gender they identify as, and so sometimes that's where that can get muddled. So transvestite is separate. It's not harder than not transitioning. That for people who are trying to bring their brain and body into alignment, it's not an option. So that's why the suicide rate among trans people is so high. So it's 40%. The general population suicide rate is 4%. So it makes a big difference. But for people who want to bring those two things into alignment, essentially a lot of them come to a place where the option is I transition or I'm going to kill myself. That's actually fairly common. And when they reach that point, it's no longer an option. It's like I either live authentically as who I am or I don't want to live anymore. A lot of people get there. A lot of people get to that place without quite hitting that extreme, but that's the overwhelming feeling is this is not an option for me. I'll deal with all of the grief of transitioning because the eventual outcome will be worth it. Easiest thing to do when your friend starts transitioning, ask them, like use their new name and pronouns immediately as often as you possibly can. Switching over pronouns is challenging because we do a split second, we like calculate somebody's secondary sex characteristics, the way that they look, and then we go male or female, and then we just move forward with that, and we do it with, it's unconscious. But when your friend is transitioning, the most important thing is to provide a safe space by showing them that you see them for who they actually are, even if visually on the outside they're not there yet, because it's a process and it's going to take time. So using their new name, like it's something simple like changing their name in your phone makes a big difference because then you see their name over and over and over and you begin to associate it with them in a stronger way, and making sure that you do your best to start switching over pronouns as fast as possible is really important. And then if you're referring to your friend in their previous life, pre-transition, it's important to carry those over. So if you're talking about somebody that you grew up with, carrying over their name that they have now and the pronouns they have now can be important because it has a level of erasure, of erasing kind of who they are now by bringing up their past. And it can be awkward depending on the social situation. To just be swapping names and genders if the people that you're talking to aren't aware that they're trans, like it becomes sticky. So just go with their new name and gender and use that exclusively. When you're an adult, what you have to do is, it's about a 2 to 9 year process. It depends. 2 is really fast, and usually it's quite a bit longer than that. But so you need to go see a psychologist. You see them for a minimum of 3 months, generally. That deadline has changed a little bit, but for our purposes, we'll just go there. So a minimum of 3 months, they would diagnose you with GID, so gender identity disorder, which is what I have. It's in the DSM-5 and it's been there for a long time. So, and then from there, you can be referred to any general practitioner can prescribe hormones. Most of them know so little about transitioning that they refuse to. So you want to find a general practitioner that's trans-friendly. They can start you on hormone therapy, be it estrogen blockers, androgen blockers, or testosterone, depending on which direction you're going. It's one or the other. From there, you can get a referral to either Dr. Petrick or Dr. Lauren Warnicki, both of whom are in Edmonton. They're your kind of gateway to surgery if you want to continue with medical intervention. And so both of them have about a year to a year and a half waiting list. So you're living your life during this time, potentially starting hormone therapy and waiting for these referrals. Once those referrals go in and you get in to see them, you're going to see them every 2 to 3 months until you're through all of your surgical intervention. What that can often look like is they'll send in referrals for various surgeries depending on which direction you're going, and then you do the same thing on the surgery side where you're waiting 6 months to 2 years for each individual surgery, and while you're doing this, you're working, going to school, growing up, whatever you happen to be doing, and you're going through this process at the same time. Oh, it's weird, and it's especially weird in the workplace because I worked construction as a woman and then ended up working in the service industry as a guy, almost back to back. That made it really interesting because I went from being a carpenter to a chef, and so it's interesting because you don't forget, you don't gain, because male privilege exists and it's a facet of our world, but you don't forget how you were treated as a woman, and so I think that you can use it to your advantage, and that's what I've always tried to do, is because you notice when it's happening, you can point it out for one thing, or you can take the opportunity to use the benefit of your privilege to benefit other people. So things like advocating for women in your workplace when you're aware that they're getting the raw end of the deal, because you see it, because you're being treated differently than they are, that kind of thing, and pointing out instances of homophobia and sexism, because you can, like, take the opportunity if you have the privilege, and you're given privilege without you asking for it, right? So it's just given to you automatically societally, so you might as well take that and do something productive with it. If you ignore it and don't do anything productive with it, then you're contributing to the problem, right? And so it can be a little bit odd, but you never forget what it felt like, and so you notice in stark contrast when that changes, and taking advantage of those situations and being able to put them to greater use is really important. Oh, I can't have kids. Yeah. I can't have kids because in order to change my gender marker in Alberta, I have to be rendered sterile. What? It's actually, yeah, it's part of the medical transition that is required by the government of Alberta in order to change my gender marker. It's stupid, it doesn't make any sense. A lot of guys do it because of the cancer risk. It's kind of like your appendix is just hanging out, waiting to get infected, right? And in 1989, in the US, in Washington, there was a trans guy who had not had a hysterectomy at all. He'd had chest surgery and kind of just moved on. He got cervical cancer. The hospital in his city refused to treat him, and he died at home, right? Because he was male appearing, and they freaked out and they wouldn't deal with him. And so there's a lot of like mitigating your need for later medical intervention is a part of the reason that surgery is part of it. There's a huge cancer risk too, because we don't know, statistically, there are not a lot of trans guys in their 90s that we can like watch the long-term health of whatever, right? So we don't actually know long-term if there is any adverse effects on female sex organs with testosterone over a lifetime, right? So, but ultimately doctors are like, there's a cancer risk here, that's why we do it, and if you want to change your gender marker, you have to be rendered sterile, which makes having kids complicated. My parents were interesting in the sense that there was definitely a lot of forcing me into more feminine things, but it got significantly more dramatic as I got closer and closer to puberty. But when I was young, we just played with the toys that you had. They weren't insanely, I had lots of like Lego and Fisher-Price toys, and they were all relatively gender neutral. My family has a lot of tomboys in it. It wasn't an uncommon thing. But when it came to formal occasions and dressing up for things, my parents definitely took the opportunity to put me in like the girliest thing that they could, because I was so boyish and reveled in it. And that was far more traumatic than any of the like toys I played with. I don't think it would have made any difference.